Recently, 25 cold water swimmers completed a record-setting dip in icy 4-degree water at Fraserburg near Sutherland. 6 of them managed a mile, the others 600 meters, in what are believed to be the most extreme conditions ever swum in Africa. It came hot on the heels, if that's the right term, of extreme adventurer Pugh, who has long baffled scientists with his ability to withstand icy water. In 2005, he spent 6 months training for a swim in the Arctic Ocean. 5 years later, he's been at it again, this time in a lake at the bottom of Mt Everest. And we followed him to the top of the world for his record-breaking plunge.
This lake is just underneath, or just at the bottom of Mt Everest. I mean, there's nobody for 2-3 kilometers. The nearest people are all those climbers who are ascending Mt Everest at base camp. It's one of the most inhospitable places to get to. Last night I was outside my tent and I saw a body of one of the climbers being taken down off the mountain, dead. He died there 5 years ago on Mt Everest. And when you see something like that, you think to yourself, is this going to be me? It's a very frightening place, Mt Everest.
Extreme athlete Pugh has braved water beyond cold. Water few would even dare enter. Pugh has swum it all, the length of the Thames, the width of the Maldives, and a long-distance swim in the 5 oceans of the world. But this was going to be the toughest yet. Adjacent to the Kumba Glacier, Lake Pumeri is situated just below Mount Everest at 5,300 meters. And it's here Lewis has chosen to take his record-breaking dip. Many elements to this mission, one of them just getting there.
Yeah, it's a long walk. If you look down that valley over there, it takes about a day to get all the way up to here. It's been 14 days of hiking.
We last met Lewis after another world first, his record-breaking swim across the icy -1-degree waters of the North Pole.
In life, we set these boundaries, and we think that we can't go any further. But really, these boundaries are in our imagination many times, and that we can go just so much further.
Yeah, it's cold.
Breaking his own boundaries has brought Lewis to the dusty and hectic capital of Nepal, Kathmandu. It was early May when this epic journey began. The core component of the team backing Lewis physically and mentally is made up of people he's come to regard as family. They've been with him on other expeditions. In charge is Toyne Sewell, a former British Army general. Now, is Lewis a physical rarity or is it his mental strength? What is it?
I think it's a mixture of both. And you've got to be pretty physically tough to go into the water at that temperature. But actually, it's in the brain, it's in the mind, the determination, the sheer bloody mindedness to do it that I think gets him through.
Flying into Lukla at the easily breathable altitude of 2,850 meters, the team find themselves part of the glut of mountaineers who arrive at this little mountain village to trek up to Everest Base Camp.
This is the most extreme airport I've ever seen in the whole world.
Pugh's mission is unique, but like all who pass through this Hindu mountain village, it's necessary to get the ritual blessings before starting on his journey. Lewis calls this a swim for peace. It's a plea to every nation in the world to do what it can to put the brakes on climate change.
I think that this area, the Himalayas, these mountains behind me, I think they're going to be the next big battleground. There are glaciers here, hundreds and hundreds of glaciers, and they're retreating because of climate change. North of here, we have China. South, we've got India, we've got Pakistan, Bangladesh. All these countries rely on the water from these glaciers.
He's very determined. He's got a very strong sense of why he's doing what he's doing. You know, it's often said that someone with a strong enough why will put up with any how. And Lewis has such a passion about what he's doing. And together that with the physical conditioning and the mental conditioning makes him a unique athlete.
Mind coach David Becker first met Lewis at varsity. They've been friends ever since.
My job is to get him to a position where before he jumps into the water, he's mentally focused, not just physically, but mentally focused. He's in a peak state mentally.
And you're working with Lewis, a lot of the time you're working with the subconscious mind. Now, what do you mean by that?
Well, the subconscious mind is responsible for the heart beating, hair growing, nails growing, etc. All I'm doing is I get him into a relaxed state and I work with his subconscious mind. I almost bypass the conscious mind and I work with that subconscious mind and I make sure that that's protecting him while he's in the water.
The most important part of my training has been to get my mind right. 3 years ago, I did a swim across the North Pole where I nearly lost my fingers because the water was so cold. And that was ingrained deep in my memory. You know, when you nearly lose your hands, you never ever forget it. And it's been like, I suppose I could give a computer analogy. It's like when you get a virus on a hard drive, you have to clean the whole hard drive and put new programs on. And so I've had to work with my coach and try to completely forget about what happened at the North Pole 3 years ago. This is a new swim, new surroundings. I've trained hard, prepared hard, and we're walking up the mountain nice and slowly. And I can do this swim. And I've just got to try and get all those negative thoughts and all those worries which naturally come into your mind, you've got to try and get them out of your mind just before the swim.
Supermarket giant Pick n Pay have backed Lewis in his global awareness campaign because, in Jonathan Ackerman's words, this is our future. Why did you decide to get behind Lewis and his venture?
Global warming is an issue in the food industry of a huge proportion, and we've got to protect our seas, our waters, our mountains, our rivers. And Lewis is out there protecting the future.
Before you take off, you can't swim in a wetsuit. It's got to be Speedo, goggles and cap.
Absolutely. I do it because I go around the world meeting heads of state and business leaders and I ask them to take steps to protect the environment, and they need to be courageous. And often these are unpopular with the electorate or with their, with their shareholders. If I want them to be courageous, I've also got to be courageous, and swimming in a wetsuit or a dry suit is not courageous. And the second reason is because wetsuits and dry suits are for wussies. It's really that simple.
For sports scientists, Pugh's body physiology is fascinating. Specifically, his rare ability to raise his body temperature despite freezing conditions.
Every single cold water swim which I've done over the past 5 years, I've been doing it with Professor Tim Noakes at the Sports Science Institute, and he's asked me to swim with a thermometer in order to do some scientific tests. Fortunately, this time they've now developed a small thermometer which I can actually swallow.
It's up a different orifice.
And a big relief.
Swimming in this extreme cold with water 2 degrees and lower is not only brave, it's dangerous and could be fatal. Dr. Sean Gottschalk, the expedition doctor, will be on hand if Lewis's body actually fails him.
Basically, when you get very cold, you can pass out and your heart rate can go from very high when you're anxious going into the water to very, very low as the cold seeps into the body to the point where you literally pass out in the water.
Lewis had said that you can actually increase your core body temperature by something like 2 degrees.
I can do it, yes, and I can do it with aggression and speed. So I stand on the edge of the sea ice at the North Pole, I rev myself up, I listen to good quality music, Puff Daddy, Eminem, that type of stuff, and then I dive in. And because of that, my core body temperature rises.
As the hike progresses slowly up the mountain, Lewis keeps his body accustomed to cold water by taking the occasional dip in a mountain stream. It's not a sight the Nepalese locals are used to. But it's not the icy water that is the major threat, nor is it the tough hike to get here. It is simply the altitude. Walking up higher and higher, the team takes it slowly. But here in the Himalayas, altitude is king, knocking down even the most hardy. By the time they reach Tengboche at 3,860 meters, most of the team are suffering, not least of all Lewis.
Let's look around, you can see the lake.
Lake Imja is the location of the first test swim. And at an altitude of 5,010 meters, Lewis's body is wrecked. His movements slow, his mind numb. There's doubt in the team he'll manage to conquer this one. But he pulls himself together and revs himself up to conquer the cold. The length of this test swim is a mere 300 meters. What have you learnt about altitude? It must have been a long lesson.
it was actually quite a quick lesson. I did that 300-meter swim, and then I realized you can't bully Mount Everest with speed and aggression. And I went out with a complete wrong tactic, and twice I think I nearly came close to going under. So during the second swim, instead of trying to use speed and aggression, I tried to swim as slowly as possible. I went from crawl, and I've never ever in my life swum breaststroke before. I went from crawl straight to breaststroke and just imagined myself in the Sea Point Pavilion in Cape Town, swimming with an old lady and trying to swim as slowly and as deliberately as possible.
2 days later, with a completely new strategy for achieving his goal, Lewis and the team hiked down from their camp to Lake Pumeri for the main swim. At just under 5,400 meters, he's battling to breathe. To create a frame of mind to achieve the swim, Lewis retreats into the tent with his second mind coach, Martin Jenkins.
There's an enormous power that's exerted within Lewis when he gets into the water, and this is necessary. It's necessary because it's so painful to be in the water for that period of time. What we need to do is make sure that the intensity with which he approaches the swim from his own mental perspective is so sharp, so focused and so intense that nothing will stop him, neither the pain nor any of the doubts or the fears which might arise in his mind as the swim progresses.
I lay in a tent. We had some small heaters in the tent. I looked up at Mount Everest and I tried to be as calm and as quiet as possible. I said to all the Sherpas and all my team, no clapping, nothing. I'm just going to walk gently into the water. If you try and swim too fast, you're going to drown because you're hyperventilating. You go like this and you're going to gasp in water and, you know, one lungful and you're going to be at the bottom of that lake.
Who was there to save you?
The designated safety person on the day was Michael Henderson.
My role is to, if Lewis is overcome by the cold and he gets into trouble, I've got to make sure that I get in the water and I get him out the water.
Michael Henderson, a man Lewis trusts implicitly, drills the Sherpas on what the plan will be if Lewis passes out.
And I will push him up. Are you with me?
Yes, yes.
And you guys will pull him into the boat. You'll lie him across.
Okay, first I have the data capture kit. You've already swallowed the pill.
And Dr. Sean Gottschalk will be on standby, his portable emergency theatre ready for action.
This is the serious intravenous medication in case there's a resuscitation. This is a defibrillator, again, for emergencies. And this bag contains full intravenous and airway access. Drips, airways, the whole story.
Okay. If there's a problem on the other side of the lake, what is the operating procedure?
Well, the operating procedure is as follows. We will use a boat. I'll be following you.
Yeah.
And if there's a major problem, we will put you in the boat, bring you back to the tent. The tent will be warm. We'll have all the resuscitation equipment, and we'll sort you out.
Swimming a kilometre in freezing water at an altitude of over 5,000 meters is surely a huge physical challenge. But strangely enough, most of Lewis's training takes place without him lifting a finger. Lewis, you've never told us really how you get your mind right.
You've got to do two things, I think. The first is, when things go really bad, you've got to walk all the way back to the beginning of your life, and you've got to remember all your successes. So often in life, what happens is, when things go wrong, we start remembering all our failures, and then they start multiplying, and then suddenly everything seems impossible. Second thing you've got to do is you've got to walk all the way to the end of your life. It sounds very macabre, but walk to the end of your life, turn around, and ask yourself truly what you're trying to achieve. And for me, it was really, really simple. Some 2 billion people rely on the water which comes from these glaciers. And I was trying to do a swim to get world leaders to understand that what's happening here is going to affect everybody around the world.
It's Martin who calms and focuses Lewis's mind as the big moment approaches.
And my role is literally in the minutes before the swim to make sure that Lewis's mindset is very clearly ordered so that as he goes into the water, he goes in there in a very, very strong, laser-like focused state of mind.
It's time. Sink or swim. There's hardly a sound as Lewis walks out to the edge of the water and in. The first 100 meters, were those the most difficult or?
Yes, because I tried to swim crawl. I swam crawl for 60 meters and was then completely out of breath. I stopped, I converted into breaststroke, tried to calm myself down, and then you start thinking, gosh, you know, I've only done 80 meters of 1 kilometer, and already things are going pear-shaped. And then you just got to try and calm down, just get the control of the breathing. Imagine that old lady swimming next to me at the Sea Point Pavilion, and just swim with that old lady.
Lewis aims to swim 1 kilometre of this icy water. This will require 6 laps back and forth. Were you getting any encouragement from the boat?
I asked all of them because during the test swim they were cheering and they were shouting and they were waving Nepalese flags, etc. And I just said, no, we've got to have the complete opposite tactic here. We've got to have complete still and quiet. And so every time I took a stroke, I looked up at Mt Everest. It's a beautiful mountain. You've got Nuptse on the one side, you've got Mt Everest there, and you think about those people climbing up there and just all the history on that mountain. It's a very special place and it's inspiring.
Finally, Lewis Pugh, despite the altitude and the cold, wearing his trademark Speedo and goggles, emerges from the lake after swimming 1 kilometre in 2-degree water in 22 minutes and 51 seconds. For Lewis, the swim has been a life-changing experience.
You can't bully Mount Everest. I could bully the North Pole, I can bully Cape Point, I can bully Stockner Fjord, but this place you've got to show peace and humility.
It's all in the mind, he says, but an incredible amount of planning behind that swim. Well done, Lewis. We want to know what's next, but I guess we'll have to wait and see. And to end our show with a bang, or at least the sound of crushing metal, we put a local monster truck through its paces after the break.